Welcome, Destination Draft Day here. Michael Rochman flying solo. No Nick Durst today. We are going to be talking about some very intriguing teams in the NFC South that recently, with the retiring of Sean Payton, with the retiring of Tom Brady, now are looking at potentially competing and contending to win the division and maybe make playoffs. And when you get to playoffs, anything can happen from there. Michael Rochman here. You're watching Chris Landry Football's Twitch channel, or maybe something else, maybe the YouTube channel. But we are very excited to get started today. And, let's just dive right into it with some recent news as well. Looking around at the rest of the league, the NFL Combine has had some really intriguing stories in terms of what's going to happen, because players are talking about potentially opting out of drills, opting out of doing anything because of the restrictions placed on the event. Look, this is a weird situation. I'm actually kind of surprised that the NFL Draft Committee and NFL Committee as a whole really put restrictions, just because it feels like we're longer into the process to where you would think maybe the larger corporations wouldn't care as much and would try to get away with not having to set the restrictions. Indiana, I'm pretty sure, doesn't have very heavy COVID restrictions as well. Definitely a responsible decision to make, but I'm surprised by it nonetheless. Brian Flores joining the Steelers coaching staff. Look, I'm a Patriots fan, so there's a little bit of a rivalry between us and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so for that, I hate to see it that he's on the Steelers, because I think that's a great hire. I'm really excited that he's going to continue coaching. I feel like a lot of people would have tried to dismiss his argument against the NFL with this idea of, he could have been a coach if he just worked hard and worked his way back up. Now he's with the Steelers working as an assistant. And I think that gives him more of a case to kind of prove his point. Like, hey, this isn't just because I was not willing to try and be a coach. And he was worthy of being a head coach again. You can't tell me that a guy like Lovie Smith deserved to be a head coach more. I think that for Flores here, there's so much into it that I'm not going to be able to tell you, everything that went on, obviously. But I think with this situation, there's certainly a case. And I think the fact that he's going to be working this season in a new role is going to help his case. Whereas we saw with Kaepernick, a lot of people tried to dismiss the argument with the fact that he was no longer playing, even though he had some backup opportunities reported. So I think this is a good move for Flores, and I'm interested to see what the play out is of it. But that's pretty much the NFL news. So now we will dive into the Carolina Panthers mock offseason. And if you remember the Houston Texans mock offseason, I talked about how Deshaun Watson would be a major part of that situation. I think that the Panthers are willing to make a trade. You look at what is going to happen when it comes to the just overall need for talent. And I think Matt Rule is going to be a little bit worried about needing to make a move, and therefore I think he makes this trade. Brian Burns is the tough one to swallow, I think, for Panther fans. But ultimately, they trade away Brian Burns, a first-round pick next year, a first-round pick this year, Sam Darnold for cap relief, which is the Texans just kind of doing them a favor, a fourth-round pick this year and next, and a second-round pick next year. Look, you get Deshaun Watson. You have the weapons in place. The question is, can you set up the offensive line? We've seen Deshaun Watson succeed with some horrendous offensive lines in Houston. Now, does that mean you intentionally just try to make it to where you just don't care about what Watson's going to do next year and you just put him behind anyone and you say, there you go, make it happen? Absolutely not. But I think he has the skill set to where he can make it work. I think you still try to invest in the offensive line, which I have them doing, signing Chris Hubbard here in this mock offseason. 2 years, $6 million deal. Chris Hubbard put up a very solid depth year for the Cleveland Browns. He had plenty of snaps, and then he got hurt this year and was missing the entire season. I think with Carolina, you're looking for a guy that can either play guard or tackle. I think Christensen gets another year at tackle, so you're looking at someone to play that left guard spot. And I think Hubbard fills it in quite well to kind of solidify the offensive line. At least for a day one starting group, you have something somewhat in place. Key signings, Brandon Zylstra, Daquan Jones, Hassan Reddick, and Stephon Gilmore. You can make this happen with some cuts. I think you cut one of Cameron Irving or Pat Alfleen. I think you're looking at restructures. I think you keep around McCaffrey, so you're restructuring him. I think you're restructuring some other pieces on this defense. Reddick and Gilmore are going to be the big price tags that you have to find a way to make work. But I think with the connection that they have, whether it's Hassan Reddick to Matt Rule or Stephon Gilmore to Carolina, I don't think you have to blow them away necessarily. And I think you can get away also with maybe a lower first-year cap hit with heavier cap hits down the road. On the draft side of things, I think they go Marquise Hayes with the first pick that they have, and that's at pick 143 in this situation. Getting a guy on the offensive line that's kind of proven himself, has nice potential. I think that's one of the big things that Matt Rule has done in terms of building up his teams, is he tries to go potential heavy and coach it up. And I think Hayes is a guy that he would look at and see that same intrigue. You know, with the next pick, I have him going JT Woods. I think this is a typical Rule move where he kind of picks guys that he has connections to. And JT Woods, coming from Baylor, very strong, very safe safety for the team. He played a lot of free safety, which I think they need. Jeremy Chin, obviously more of a Swiss Army knife that's playing lower on the field. So you get a guy like JT Woods in that defense. I wouldn't be surprised if, for a guy like Rule, with the familiarity that they have, with the intelligence and leadership that Woods offered at Baylor, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a starter on day one. I don't think it's ideal, but I do think that it's likely to happen. The next guy that I have on this defense or on this draft is Josh Ross, linebacker out of Michigan. I think what you're looking for is a Jermaine Carter replacement. And while Ross probably won't be the starting linebacker, I do think that he's going to come in, get some potential snaps, get some heavy rotation, and hopefully contribute early. And with their last pick, 245, I have them going Bamidele Olasene, the offensive tackle out of Utah. Again, another traits guy, someone that I think really is a bit underrated in the draft market. I feel like he has a lot of tools that will intrigue coaching staffs. For Matt Rule and company, they need a guy that is able to kind of step in and hopefully compete for a job. He probably won't do that, obviously, as a late day 3 pick, but I do think that he could surprise with his tools. And if they're able to unlock that, then they could find a potential starter on an offensive line that desperately needs help. So we look ahead to the offense, and it looks very intriguing in terms of skill positions. Deshaun Watson at quarterback, Christian McCaffrey at running back, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Shi Smith at receiver, with Terrace Marshall, if he can grow and develop in that wide receiver spot as well. Tommy Tremble at tight end, Brandon Silstra also for that wide receiver group. And then on the offensive line, you got Brady Christensen at left tackle, Chris Hubbard at left guard, Sam Tecklenburg at center, Deontay Brown at right guard, and Taylor Moton at right tackle. Look, there is plenty of question marks when it comes to what is going to happen for this offense. They could easily pick an offensive lineman with their first selection or trade down and still pick an offensive lineman. I wouldn't mind it. I think that there are plenty of methods that they could go, and probably when it comes to proper team building, it would probably be the smart choice to add in a guy on the offensive line early and then let your team kind of be built that way before you bring in a quarterback. But right now, I think the Panthers are in a weird situation of Rule knows he's on the hot seat, and if things don't work out, then he's gone. All right, so when you're looking at that, you got to say, okay, how do I do enough to save my job this year? And when that is considered, I think it means quarterback. You can make a case, even if the team is bad next year, but they draft Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis, then if they're exciting, then there's a strong case to be made where you're saying, look, give me another year with this QB. I obviously showed promising traits with him. I think together we build this up. Worst case, we don't make the proper steps, and then you fire me. But if you draft an offensive lineman, even if your offensive lineman is good, but your passing game is just awful, then there's no real case to be keeping you. So that's why I think Rule and company are going to be forced to draft a QB. I don't think it's necessarily like a doomsday situation, but I think they will need to get a quarterback. And in this situation, I think Deshaun Watson is the safest bet. And especially in a division where, we don't know who the top team is going to be. It wouldn't shock me if a Deshaun Watson-led Panthers team is capable of making the playoffs. And I know because of the finish they had last year, a lot of people are going to maybe scoff at that. But I think you look at how hot they started the season last year, then injuries decimated their defense, then even Sam Darnold continued to struggle. So, you put in good quarterback play, you continue to get this defense back and healthy. I think you have a very good team on your hands, and I know that they're going to get exposed in some games. I don't think it's a team that's contending just yet, but I do think that this is a team that with the right build, with the right offseason, this offseason, with the official, goodbye to Brady, assuming that he's definitely gone, not just saying he's retired and then ends up coming back, then I think that the Panthers could potentially be that playoff team, similar to how the Eagles were able to sneak in with a lack of NFC competition. I think with the NFC South so in question, we could see the Panthers kind of have a similar year where they just are able to kind of get it done, maybe not pretty, but enough. And I think that's why, if you can make a move for a guy like Watson, then I wouldn't be surprised. Now, I know there's a lot of people that are going to question the off-field stuff of Watson. Yes, if he's suspended 8 games, then that probably takes Rule out of the situation. But what we've seen from the Panthers so far is they were willing to trade when it came time to make an offer for Deshaun Watson. So this is not a question of would they do it. It's more how much are they willing to pay for him and will they be the highest bidder? Because they are absolutely in on Deshaun Watson. That's confirmed. No question about it. You can guarantee that. It's just, will they actually make the trade that makes the deal official? Will they be the team that the Panthers or that the Texans ultimately agree with in terms of getting the deal done? And that's really what will be watched all offseason for all these QBs that are on the market. Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, I don't think they'd go to the Panthers. But I do think that assuming we see a trade of Watson and assuming that, the Panthers haven't just completely changed their mind because they're infatuated with a young QB, then I think they absolutely are going to send an offer for Watson. And I wouldn't be surprised if they are the team that ends up winning the sweepstakes, because I think they probably have the most to lose if they don't get them, especially if they aren't in love with someone in this class. But if they were to draft someone, I think Kenny Pickett seems to be the heaviest smoke when it comes to this team. He has probably the safest floor of this class for a lot of people. So I think that's something where Rule kind of makes that pick. He says, look, he had a promising rookie year, and then you kind of hope to get the team built in the other way. He's always kind of had situations like that where he kind of builds the team outside of the group that is the QB spot. You get it through skill players, through an offensive line. I think there's a lot of question marks. And I know I'm kind of rambling here. I'm sorry. I'm also putting together a graphic for the Falcons one. I haven't finished entirely. But I think there's a lot of question marks about this Falcons team, or Panthers team, sorry. And the offensive line is really where you have to address it here. We see Brady Christensen at the left tackle spot, but all year last year, they were moving him entirely around the defense. And it's very difficult to develop as an offensive lineman, a young offensive lineman, when you're not getting a solidified spot on the offensive line. We've seen guys get just demolished in terms of development just because they're moving sides from left tackle to right tackle. So when you're looking at a team that has a guy playing left tackle one week, then right guard the next, then right tackle the next, and then right guard after that, there's huge question marks for what he really is expected to do because he's not able to do it then and there. And, I mean, man, the Panthers need to figure out what Brady Christensen's role is going to be this season and stick with it 100%. Talked about Chris Hubbard a little bit. I think he's a guy that can play either tackle or guard. I think with the situations that are going on for the, just offensive line here, you need to find low price tags on the offensive line to feel comfortable with who you're going to start. And I think that's how you get a guy like Chris Hubbard to come in and be your starter, because he's getting the opportunity for playtime. He's getting the opportunity to really kind of be your starting lineman somewhere on this line. And I think when you're questioning, who's going to come in and be a starter, you can find that in pieces in this class. It's just the question of, can you find that in a comfortable way? And I think while it's a bit optimistic, I do think that a Chris Hubbard type could come in and be a starter long term on this offense. I think, or on this offensive line. The big question mark is what's going to happen with Matt Paradis. I had them letting him walk in free agency. Some people aren't going to like that because Paradis isn't completely done yet. He was all right. But I think right now with the price tag he'll likely demand, with the need for money, you let him walk. You take Tecklenburg, who looked all right. I don't think he's going to be your long-term answer, but I think he can fill in as a starter. We've seen a lot of guys that are late-round centers bloom into very long-term pieces on the offensive line. So I don't mind starting Tecklenburg. I think there's plenty of potential there for him to become something. I think you ultimately get the opportunity to have a guy that, worst case, you get answers on and you get clarity. And I think right now for the Panthers, you kind of are hoping for clarity in this situation where a lot of your team is up in the air in terms of what's going to happen with it, what the future will look like, especially, head coach. So figuring out the offensive line, giving young guys an opportunity to kind of become something, I think is huge. And that's why I also have Deonte Brown starting. He had some good games, but he had some injuries. He had some bad moments. I'm not saying he was perfect, but I do think that there is potential here for Deonte Brown to become something. And for that, I think that you're looking at a guy that has the power, has the strength, but the Panthers really like their guys moving around. So he still needs to grow. He still needs to kind of make those necessary steps to become a scheme fit, become a guy that can really ultimately become something. But you drafted this guy for a reason. I think you're expected to have confidence in him. And right now, I don't think there's been enough to where you should be looking at this guy and feeling like, oh, it's time to move on. It's time to look at another position. You've gotten some solid pieces, like in terms of picks, that you've spent. So now you have to kind of see what you can make happen. You aren't in the luxury of saying, oh, he wasn't good enough. Let's go back to the well and see what we can do. Absolutely not. You have to make the decision of riding it out with him, trying to make him work. And I think that's what you can ultimately do. I think Deonte Brown has plenty of promise, plenty of opportunity, and plenty of potential. It's just, can the Panthers develop him, and can he kind of make those steps himself? I'm rooting for him. I really like those bigger framed offensive linemen, especially when they're able to kind of transition to the NFL and make the jump. I think Deonte Brown has shown excellent effort in terms of just losing the weight pre-draft that let him kind of show teams he was serious about becoming something in the NFL. And now for the Panthers, you kind of hope he can become something on your offensive line, or else you're going to be stuck in a situation where you are just, even if you draft a guard, you're still not looking at a team that has enough in terms of capital to where you can say, okay, that's fine. We're good elsewhere. You aren't. You have to kind of stick with this guard spot and hope that you can ultimately get contribution out of the picks that you've already made, or else it's going to be a bad time for whoever's back there, whether it's Kenny Pickett or Deshaun Watson or freaking Bailey Zapp, who knows? So ultimately, that's the situation here. Taylor Moton is a guy that I absolutely love. I think he's one of the safest offensive linemen in the NFL. I think he's extremely underrated because he's on such a bad offensive line. Keep him at right tackle. That's your guy. That's your star. Hopefully, the rest of this unit can hold up enough for this offense to get going. On the defensive side, I think there is going to be a very good unit because that's just how Matt Rule and Phil Snow have done in terms of developing this team. There's plenty of potential here. So you're looking at guys like Brian Burns no longer on the unit, and you say, oh, is that going to ruin it? I don't think so, because you have pieces like Yetur Gross-Matos, Hassan Reddick, Morgan Fox. They run this weird defense where, you kind of have multiple, like a few edge rushers on the field at a time. So I put Reddick at linebacker because I have a very vanilla format kind of here for the blueprints, but ultimately he's an edge rusher. Hassan Reddick, he's this hybrid edge. Works extremely well for Matt Rule's defense and what they're going to run with him. Gross Matos, Morgan Fox, I think you still have enough contribution out of your edge rushing group, that this is going to be a good defense. I think you bring back Dion Jones. Derek Brown, I think, is in for a big year. You have some other pieces as well. This isn't it. Davion Nixon looked pretty good until he got hurt. I think he can be a major contributor in that like rotational role this year. And just in looks that are more pass rush heavy, I think he's definitely the guy you want on the field in those third down passing situations over a guy like a Daquan Jones who's more of a nose tackle. At the linebacker spot, you got Shaq Thompson, Frankie Lavu, and, like I said, Hassan Reddick kind of goes here, but he's really all over the field. He's a guy that I think is going to really kind of impress when it comes to just consistency on the team. He's someone that's just you can always depend on him to have a good game. And there's a lot of times with the Cardinals where that wasn't the case. And the question was, he had this big game, but can he continuously do it? Now he's become almost a staple of consistency for the Panthers. And I think that was a huge signing for them. He's going to get a big contract this year. That's kind of the big question mark, is can they afford to really kind of bring him back with the limited cap they have, especially if they were to bring in a QB contract like Deshaun Watson. But ultimately, I think he is incredibly worth it. He's a Matt Rule guy, so I think they're going to have similar feelings in regards to him. I think you're looking at Yetur Gross-Matos to kind of make that next step, and I think he can. Morgan Fox has been consistent. I think he's a solid rotational piece. Maybe you're looking to replace him eventually if you're the Panthers, but for a one-year Band-Aid, I think he's absolutely fine. Shaq Thompson, I think, is one of the weirder contracts in the NFL, but they can't really get rid of him. That's one thing that I really dislike about how the Panthers have built this team. So many of their contracts they're stuck with. You got guys like Cameron Irving and Pat Elflein who are making $6 million a year. And, I mean, that's already kind of a big hit, but you're also just saying, the dead money on it, you can only save about $2 million. So, yeah, you're probably going to cut one of them this offseason, but if you could have gotten it to where you're getting lower guaranteed money on these guys, then you offer yourself more flexibility down the road. It feels like a bit of arrogance in terms of how they constructed this, in terms of, we're going to make it work. But it didn't work, and there's a reason it didn't work. And it needs to kind of change. They need to bet on themselves a little less. Yes, you should have absolute confidence that you're going to make things happen. You're going to kind of figure things out, make things work. You're going to find some value late. But at the same time, you can't expect to be this messiah that's just going to fix every issue that any offensive lineman has and just make contracts that are going to absolutely screw you in the future. And right now, with what they've done, they are just – it's so bad. They have no idea just how horrible this move was, and I think it's just something that will continue to haunt them in terms of just how bad these contracts are, and it's going to probably show up if their team, even if they overachieve, right, they make playoffs, they're going to find in the playoffs that they're not able to withstand any of the pressure, and they're going to say, we'll address the offensive line this offseason, but the money is going to consistently be an issue. You need to make contracts that are much more team-friendly. You need to find deals in that regard. And I know that that's easy to say, but you can't be giving out $6 million to a Pat Elflein or a Cam Irving, each making about $6 million, with such little freedom to cut them when they have been nothing but bad in their career. Like, this is just horrible team management. And for that, it really causes questions of, is this actually going to be a team that figures it out, or are they just going to continue to kind of screw themselves up? And, I didn't hate the Darnold trade when it happened. I thought that there was going to be potential for them to kind of make it work. So I don't fault them for that. And I don't fault them for taking the fifth-year option. I think that was the smart move, and if it worked out, it would have been genius. But I do think that with some of these other contracts, you have to kind of give yourself the chance at freedom. And they haven't done that. They failed to do that. And now they're looking at a offseason where they're strapped for cash, regardless of if they make a trade or not. That Sam Darnold contract and that trade is why they aren't going to just completely be in cap hell. But if you don't make that trade for Watson, you still have Darnold on your books, and you're still taking a very big cap hit and you're still taking a very rough situation in terms of flexibility with the cap. So the Panthers ultimately mismanaged their roster, and they took what was one of the more promising young teams in the NFL and now kind of put them back and delayed on another few years. And yes, they can be a playoff team. I've said that numerous times, but in terms of contending, I don't think it's realistic for this season. And, I think there is a certain amount of optimism that every team should have. And I think if you're a well-built team, even if it's not going to happen, you should have the optimism of being a contender. And the Panthers have failed to build the team in that regard, and therefore they are setting themselves up to really kind of have some issues. And, Deshaun Watson, a superstar QB, can potentially give you a chance to kind of overcome those shortcomings, but it doesn't make it to where you can contend. And with the Panthers unit, I think that's where the big issue is, with that lack of flexibility, with that lack of opportunity, you're now kind of looking at, okay, we need to build our offensive line with limited draft capital, with limited talent, like just retained on cheap value. So you're just not really having money. You're not really having so many pieces that are needed for team building, and you're a team that absolutely needs rebuilt. So huge question marks for this Falcons team, or for this Panthers team long term. But ultimately, I do like the defense. J.C. Horn is one of the more solid pieces. Stephon Gilmore back would be absolutely huge for them. You're looking at guys like Jeremy Chin and J.T. Woods. I think there is a very good secondary here. There is some very good defensive pieces. The defense probably won't be an issue. But I do think that the lack of flexibility to go out and add more pieces because of the way you built this team is going to haunt them in the long term. And that is why when it comes to the Panthers, a lot of people were ready to get rid of Matt Rule. So moving off of the Panthers, we'll move on now to the Falcons, a team that I think inherited a very bad cap situation, but they've done a nice job of kind of figuring it out. They overachieved this year, in my opinion, but I don't think that means that they have to drop down. I think they can have a very good offseason. No Calvin Ridley. So I think with the rumors that he wants out, you kind of make it happen. You take the trade. I think Arizona would be a nice spot. They need another wide receiver opposite of DeAndre Hopkins. It's rumored that Kyler Murray's unhappy. So you trade Ridley and your fifth-round pick to Arizona for their first and third. I think that's fair value for both sides. You get the 23rd pick that allows you to kind of go with a top talent at the beginning, and then you can kind of address needs maybe in that second first-round pick. I think you got to bring back Cordell Patterson with the season he had, and I think he's going to be willing to do it for cheap. I think you bring back Russell Gage because there's zero familiarity in this wide receiver unit right now. You have Frank Darby as the only returning receiver, assuming Ridley's gone. So you bring back Russell Gage to be your receiver 3, your veteran presence. Foyesade Olukun is your linebacker that you got to bring back. He was very capable, consistent all year. I think he's one of the few just safe, consistent pieces on this team. So I think there's a little bit needed there in terms of just keeping him on the roster. And I think you keep Isaiah Oliver and Fabian Moreau because, again, getting those pieces. The secondary wasn't perfect last year for the Falcons, but I think it's underrated, extremely underrated, because of how rough the pass rush is. Does this mean that, they add some pass rushing pieces and the Falcons now have this top 5 offensive line in football? No, absolutely not. But I do think that with the chance of adding talent, with the chance of just kind of seeing what you can do with pass rush, you're going to find that some of these guys are a lot better than the stats let on. And that's huge for me is looking at the context of the situation. Falcons have one of the worst pass rushes in football. So I think investing in the pass rush, getting your guys opportunity to kind of get some help in that secondary is how you kind of build up your team I think you'll find that some of these guys are a lot better than they maybe let on with the stats, and I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to kind of push it off to next year if cornerback is a need. So with that being said, we dive into the draft side of things, and I think the ultimate priority is getting a wide receiver. With the Riddler leaving Atlanta, I think you go Garrett Wilson. I actually compare Garrett Wilson to Calvin Ridley in terms of pro comparison, so it actually works out perfectly just in my imaginational world. But I think Wilson's one of the safest wide receivers in this class. And when you look at some of the other options, Treylon Burks would be cool, but I think him and Pitts would be a lot of overlapping usage. So you add a guy like Wilson that can kind of fit in no matter what you do. I think he's got the talent to kind of be one of those quiet wide receiver ones. I think he's going to be one of the best wide receivers in this class. He's my wide receiver one personally. I think there's so much capable talent with this group of just adding a guy like Garrett Wilson that you can ultimately look at that third wide receiver spot and address it however you want. Obviously, in this mock, I have them addressing it, but I think there's just numerous options for the guys or for the Falcons, and I think it'll be very interesting to see what they do. Most likely, they will be drafting a wide receiver within their first 3 picks. I like Wilson here with the first pick of their draft. And at number 23, I'm kind of just faulting to the fact that consensus media thinks he's going to go a lot lower than current mock drafts seem to have him, and that's DeMarvin Leal. So for me, this is a guy that is just absolutely phenomenal. He has some hand usage issues. I think he's got some issues to work out. He's not entirely polished, but when you move like this at 6'4", 290, it's impressive. For the Falcons, they kind of run this 3-4 defense, so I think he'd be a down lineman. But I think that's kind of his best role is that 3-4 defensive end spot. You get him in there. You get him really kind of working alongside Grady Jarrett. There's plenty of potential there. You have Taquan Graham. You have some other pieces on that defense. Ultimately, I think there is plenty of potential for Leal to become a superstar in the NFL. We know that the Falcons kind of have the Saints mindset, right? Because Fontenot is there as their GM. And I think that, Leal kind of has some similarities to Cameron Jordan. He has that capability. He has that potential. And I wouldn't be shocked if Fontenot looks at a guy like Leal and says, look, we can develop him into something special. Yes, there may be some off-field concerns. Yes, there may be some rawness to his game. But the upside and potential for what he can become is much too strong to pass on. And so, therefore, we need to take him into this team, get some pass rush help, and become something on the defensive line. I think it'd be a tremendous pick in this first round, and it would make losing a piece like Ridley not worth it. I don't think Leal 1-for-1 for Ridley just makes it automatically worth it, but I think it helps out the team a little bit to where adding Wilson and Leal makes you a little bit okay with the fact that, you're losing a star like Ridley on the wide receiver unit because you're getting a piece like Leal in the late first. You're getting a third-round pick in return. It makes it okay to where you can get some more flexibility with how many needs you're addressing in this draft. At 43, I have him going Desmond Ritter. I don't know if I love this pick, but I do think that from what I've heard, they love Ritter. They really like what he can become. And behind Matt Ryan, I get it. I think that's going to be how Ritter succeeds is if he gets a little bit of time to grow. I don't think you shove Matt Ryan out the door. So maybe they've changed their mind after this season, but the rumors are that they love what Ritter shows on tape, that they love what Ritter can become. And, if that's the case, then yeah, I understand it. There's plenty of potential here. There's plenty of upside in his game. It's just, can you develop that upside? And if the Falcons feel like they can, then I absolutely understand spending a pick on him. They may look at him and say, look, we want to spend our late first. If they get one in a Calvin Ridley type trade or something, then yeah, they may look at using that fifth year option on a guy like Ritter and take him in the first and then push maybe pass rush or receiver to the second round. Ultimately, though, I think there is potential for why the Falcons would like him. He has a very live arm. He's a very mobile runner. I think the accuracy is always going to be a question mark when it comes to his game. It's going to make some people just not willing to buy in. The consistency from snap to snap, obviously. He had a lot of games where he would come out and just not play well. And ultimately, there's an argument to be made that Cincinnati maybe could have been a contending team if they had a higher level quarterback. But, you know, what the Falcons would be drafting in Desmond Ritter isn't what they would expect to get in 2 years. It would be what they're drafting is something they can expect to become something else in 1 to 2 years that they spend developing him. So I get the move. I think there's plenty of potential there to where it's worth it. I think there's plenty of reasoning to be excited if you're a Falcons fan and he's the pick. But at the same time, I also can't say that it's a pick that I would make. I can't say that it's a pick I blame other people for thinking it's bad. But ultimately, we've seen a lot of NFL teams develop guys that just haven't been superstars coming out, and they really kind of make necessary steps with the proper development, with an easier offense that can really kind of help that development come along. And that's why I think Ritter here in Atlanta makes sense. I do like the play action setup that they're going to get with the Arthur Smith kind of offense. So there's reasonings. I think there's plenty of ways to sell it to where you could convince me that Ritter will become something, but I understand both sides. It's pretty much all I'm saying here. And that's why I think when you look at what the Falcons have in this draft, they get that luxury of being able to kind of address a need, swing for the fences on a QB of the future, and still have picks to address other needs. And they do that with the 58th pick, getting a stand-up edge rusher that fits Dean P's system, and that's Nick Bonito. He's a nice pass rusher, one of the more electric pass rushers in college football last season. He has potential to kind of step in and start for this team. I think with the lack of talent, they absolutely need someone that can. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bonito gets in and is the starter on day one. Now, does that mean that he's going to be an absolute stud or something? No. But I do think that outside of Ogundeji, who I don't even think is necessarily like this dominant starter, I just think he can be your kind of safety net starter. The Falcons have had just horrendous defensive line play. And, you know, with Leal and Bonito added in this draft, I think that's a huge step for the pass rush. I think that's a huge step for this team. And you can feel a lot more confident about the overall defensive unit with these pieces added in. With the 74th pick, I have him going Alec Lindstrom. Center's in need. I hate the Falcons centers. No offense to the guys if they're watching this, obviously. But I think that you look at Drew Dolman, zero anchor, really. Matt Hennessy can't pull. So you need a center. And I think Lindstrom, yes, it might be cheating a little to just bring him in as the brother of Chris Lindstrom, but it makes sense. It's about the same value in terms of where he's probably going to go in the draft. He might go a little later, but I think it's the perfect situation of need and really kind of talent and what they're looking for. So Alec Lindstrom's the pick here at 74. It allows for the Falcons to maybe move around these other guys if they really do believe in them to become something. I just don't think Dolman or Hennessy are the long-term answers at center. Getting a guy like Lindstrom is absolutely huge, and it makes for a much safer offensive line next year. At 87, I have him going Romeo Doubs, wide receiver out of Nevada. Carson Strong's go-to option. I think he's a guy that, you know, can fit into an offensive wide receiver unit, and I think with this team, yes, Garrett Wilson, yes, Russell Gage. Yeah, you can argue that some of these other guys maybe could step up and contribute. Obviously, Almidi Zaccheaus could get some snaps. Continuing, Tajay Sharp, maybe if he comes back. Frank Darby will get another year of development, and maybe with a full offseason can just really kind of step in and fill in that role. But I think they double dip a receiver this offseason somehow, some way. Maybe that's getting a receiver back in this Arizona trade. Maybe that's drafting two. Maybe that's signing someone in free agency. Who knows? But I do think that they double dip at the receiver spot. And Romeo Doubs, I think, is a nice spot to do it here at 87. So getting a talent like Dubs, putting him with Wilson, putting him with Russell Gage, kind of fills out your receiver room and makes you feel a lot more comfortable heading into the season. At 112, I have him going Damien Pierce out of Florida. That's been a guy that they've been also rumored to be liking a lot. I think Mike Davis gets cut. They offered themselves a little bit of flexibility to kind of get out of that contract. Damien Pierce, I think, is your guy for the power running that you need. Cordell Patterson, I think, returns and is your starter. But I think Damien Pierce in rotation really helps out that offense and should help make this team kind of flow on the offense side. If you're letting Hayden Hurst go, I think you need a tight end too that's going to be a little bit more safer. Daniel Bellinger is one of the better blocking tight ends in this class, so I think he's someone that could be the pick. You're looking at just safety, floor, polish. Bellinger offers that. I think he's a little bit underrated even as a receiver, but good blocking tight end that I think could come in and help out your unit. They can maybe get it in the draft as well, but Bellinger, 6'4", 250, nice blocker. He's not necessarily this flashy guy, but I think he's going to be a consistent piece. So that's why you get him here in this round, and you really kind of fill out that tight end room behind Pitts with a guy like Bellinger. And then at 212, I have him going Austin Deculis, the offensive lineman out of LSU, just adding a guy that can both kind of work around a tackle and guard. You get a safe player that's been a long-term starter, plenty of experience at LSU. Add some depth to this team, add some just overall bodies to this offensive line, and I think you're on the right path. So with this draft, we look at the offense, and I think there's a lot of returning pieces that makes you feel a little bit of optimism. It's just wide receiver and center that kind of are new faces, but Matt Ryan at QB, Cordell Patterson at running back, Wilson, Dubs, and Gage at wide receiver, Kyle Pitts at tight end, Jake Matthews, Jalen Mayfield, Alec Lindstrom, Chris Lindstrom, and Caleb McGarry at right tackle. I don't love McGarry. I think that's kind of the big question mark is Mayfield and McGarry here, but ultimately, I feel like I keep saying ultimately. I apologize if you've also noticed, but I think when you look at it, McGarry's been all right. He's had his shortcomings. He's had his bad moments. He's not a good offensive tackle, but I think he's okay. Mayfield, you just spent the second-round pick on him. Yes, he was bad, but I think you have enough depth to where, it's either Mayfield or some of your other guys that could potentially step in. Jason Spriggs could do it. You could look for a guy like Rashad Coward. You can maybe bring back Josh Andrews. Maybe Matt Hennessy is the guy that steps in and works at left guard. But I think you give him another year to kind of keep it up, see if he can become something. I think he can. I like Mayfield enough to where I'd be willing to kind of give him a second chance. I think there's potential in this offensive line. I don't think it's going to necessarily take the next step, but assuming Mayfield develops, assuming Lindstrom isn't a god-awful center, I think you are a better offensive line next year. And maybe you have to go back and address right tackle if Caleb McGarry continues not to develop, but I think it's good enough to where you can feel comfortable about your offense heading into next season. Now, where the question marks are for this defense, or for this team, is the defense. But with this situation, Taquan Graham at defensive tackle, Grady Jarrett and DeMarvin Leal also added there. I think this is how you do it for the defensive line. You get some pass rush presence out of Leal. He can be your 4-3 defensive end, your 3-4 defensive end. He can step inside, be a 4-3 defensive tackle in the 5-tech, 3-tech situations. He can do it all for you. And the Falcons need that type of presence on the defensive line where they really just lack overall presence. Nick Bonito and Ogundeji on the edge, definitely a huge question mark and red flag for this team. Even if you like Bonito, he's still a rookie that is small. So you need some talent there. That's probably something that they aren't going to love, but it's going to be better. And, they had Steven Means start 13 games last year, and he had 0 sacks. It was horrendous for the Falcons last year. So having Bonito, having Ogundeji in full-time roles, yeah, it's probably not going to be a great pass rush. It's probably going to be something where next year edge is still the top priority in terms of what they need to draft. But I do think that it's going to be better because at least it's not Steven Means. Sorry to Steven Means if he ever sees this, but I think there is a lot of work here for the Falcons on the defense. With the pieces they added, I feel more comfortable with the team, but I think there's still plenty of need there that will change things around. At linebacker, you're looking at Dion Jones, Foyesade Olukon, and McCall Walker, kind of a linebacker edge type guy. I think these are solid pieces. Dion Jones is someone that could potentially get traded if they find someone to take him, but he's got a very big cap hit. So it's going to be very interesting to see if a team would be willing to take him. If he goes, though, then I think you're looking at Olukon and Walker as your starters. Jones can maybe find a new spot, but it's going to be the question of, just for the Falcons specifically, will they be able to make it by with Olukon and Walker as their starting linebackers? I think so, but I do think having Jones here is better than not having Jones here. So ultimately, it's going to be interesting, especially because with Jones' contract, you're probably not getting the value for him as a player, and you're taking a little bit of discount because of the price that he comes with. At corner, like I said, A.J. Terrell, Fabian Moreau, and Isaiah Oliver, you kind of run it back there. Hopefully with more pass rush, they look a lot better. A.J. Terrell, obviously one of the best cornerbacks in the game, and that's very impressive given how bad the pass rush is. And then Fabian Moreau looks solid. Oliver, kind of the question mark here for me, but ultimately I think you give him one more year. At safety, you bring Richie Grant back. You have Darren Hall also getting some snaps in that slot and safety spot, and then you have Jalen Hawkins at free safety. Look, there's needs on this team. The Falcons aren't pretty. They aren't absolutely set up for the future. But I do think that they have a chance with Matt Ryan and with how well they overachieved last year to contend for the division this year. And I think this is how you do it. Adding pieces in the draft that can contribute. Yes, Calvin Ridley's probably gone. If Ridley wants to stay, you can make that work. You can be very happy about that. But with the rumors, I think he's gone, and I think you have to kind of roll with that. And you have to roll with the punches. You don't want to hold on to him too long, and you end up just kind of having another player that's going to sit out, because ultimately, if you're really trying to compete right now with Matt Ryan, you can't afford to do that. So you kind of both rebuild your team by adding pieces like a DeMarvin Leal and a Romeo Doubs, but also you're helping your team right away. So I think that's the move for the Falcons. I think that's the move for the Panthers. Both teams are now addressed in terms of just offseason blueprint. That's all we have for today's episode of Destination Draft Day. We will be back next episode talking about teams like the Broncos and the Washington Commanders, both teams that are very heavy in the QB market. We'll see what I have cooking up for them. Until then, though, we appreciate everyone who dropped in and watched. I apologize if I was rambling sometime. I did have to do some of these graphics last minute. I was a little lazy in doing them last night, so apologies in that regard. But that's all we got for you, and we hope you have a great week. We'll see you Friday. Take care.